The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty film set just outside Tucson. It was March 15th, 1968, and the temperature had already climbed past 90 degrees by 10 in the morning. The crew of guns of Rio Concho was setting up for what should have been a routine confrontation scene between two gunfighters in front of a weathered saloon facade. Nobody knew that in less than 2 hours, this ordinary day of filming would turn into one of Hollywood's most terrifying close calls. Dean Martin arrived on set at 8:30, stepping out of his air-conditioned trailer, wearing a black duster coat and a wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows across his weathered makeup. At 50 years old, Dean was still a major star, though his focus had shifted more toward his television variety show and his Vegas performances. This Western was something different for him, a chance to prove he could still carry a dramatic role, not just croon and crack jokes. Clint Eastwood showed up 15 minutes later, already in costume. At 37, Clint was in a different phase of his career entirely. He'd made his name on Rawhide and had just returned from Italy, where he'd filmed 3 westerns with Sergio Leone that were starting to generate serious buzz. A fistful of dollars for a few dollars more, and the good, the bad, and the ugly hadn't fully exploded in America yet, but industry insiders knew something special was happening. Clint was on the verge of becoming a superstar, and Guns of Rio Concho was meant to capitalize on that rising momentum. The two men had a cordial but professional relationship. Dean represented the old guard of Hollywood, the Rat Pack era of cool sophistication and effortless charm. Clint represented something newer, harder, more dangerous. Dean sang and smiled. Clint squinted and brooded. They respected each other's work, but they came from fundamentally different schools of performance. Director John Sturges, who'd helmed classics like The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape, called everyone together for a morning briefing. The scene they were shooting was pivotal, a showdown between Dean's character, a retired gunslinger named Cole Brennan, and Clint's character, a younger gun named Jake Rawlins, who'd come to town specifically to challenge Cole's reputation. It was classic Western material, the old lion versus the young wolf, and Sturges wanted it to crackle with tension. "We'll do this in one long take if we can," Sturges explained, gesturing with his viewfinder. Cole walks out of the saloon, sees Jake waiting in the street. Words are exchanged. Hands move toward guns. Cole draws first, fires. Jake dodges, rolls, comes up shooting. "We'll use squibs so the bullet hits, blanks in the weapons." Standard procedure. The prop master, a veteran named Henry Kellerman, who'd been working in Westerns since the 1940s, had prepared 2 Colt Peacemaker revolvers for the scene. Both were supposed to be modified to fire blanks only. The barrels partially obstructed to prevent any projectile from exiting, even if real ammunition somehow got loaded. These safety modifications were standard practice, had been for years. Every actor who'd ever fired a gun on a film set trusted that the weapons had been properly prepared and checked. What nobody knew was that there'd been a mix-up in the prop truck the night before. A local firearms supplier named Ray Hoskins had been hired to provide additional period weapons for background actors in a crowd scene scheduled for later that week. Ray was a gun collector and enthusiast who ran a shop in Tucson and occasionally supplied props to productions filming in the area. He dropped off a crate of weapons at the prop truck around 7 p.m. the previous evening, after most of the crew had left for the day. The crate contained 6 revolvers, all genuine antiques from the 1880s that Ray had personally restored to firing condition for his collection. These were real guns, fully functional, not modified for blank firing. Lethal weapons. Ray's instructions to the night security guard had been clear. These guns were for display only, to be used in a scene where townsfolk would be shown carrying weapons during a town meeting. They would never be fired. They were simply there for authenticity. The guard, a part-timer named Eddie Solis, who was working his 3rd day on the job, nodded and signed the receipt. Then he made a critical error. Instead of placing the crate in the separate storage area designated for non-firing props, Eddie set it down next to the modified weapons, right beside Henry Kellerman's carefully organized collection of safe prop guns. By morning, when Henry arrived and began preparing for the day's shoot, he was rushing. The production was already 2 days behind schedule, and Sturges had a reputation for being demanding about staying on time. Henry grabbed what he thought were his modified Colts, the ones he'd personally checked and prepared. But in the dim morning light of the prop truck, he picked up two of Ray Hoskins' genuine antique revolvers instead. They looked identical, the same make and model, the same worn finish. The only difference was internal. In modifications, Henry couldn't see without disassembling the weapons. And Henry didn't disassemble them because he thought he was grabbing guns he'd already verified. The morning progressed normally. Rehearsals went smoothly. Dean and Clint walked through choreography half a dozen times, working out the timing, the dialogue, the movements. Clint had a specific move he wanted to try, a diving roll to the left followed by a quick draw from the ground. It was something he developed during his time working with Leone, a piece of physical business that looked great on camera. "You sure about that roll?" Dean asked, watching Clint practice. "That's a lot of dust you're eating." "Looks good, though," Clint replied with a slight smile. "And it gives you a moving target. Makes the scene more dynamic." Dean nodded. He'd been in enough films to know that Clint was right. A static gunfight was boring. Movement, especially unexpected movement, created tension and excitement. "Just don't roll right into my line of fire," Dean joked. "I'd hate to plug you with a blank." They both laughed. Blanks were harmless as long as you maintained a safe distance. Everyone knew that. This was routine. Henry Kellerman approached carrying two gun belts. He handed one to Dean and one to Clint, each with a holster revolver. "All set, gentlemen. Blanks loaded, 5 rounds each. Remember, even blanks make noise and flash, so play it real, but keep your distance on the draws." Dean strapped on his gun belt and drew the weapon, sighting down the barrel at an empty water barrel 20 feet away. The gun felt good, balanced properly, authentic weight. He twirled it once, a little showmanship, and holstered again. "Feels perfect, Henry. Good work." Clint checked his weapon more methodically, the habit of someone who'd spent years on westerns and had developed a healthy respect for firearms, even prop ones. He opened the cylinder, glanced at the brass cartridges, saw what looked like blank rounds, and closed it again. Everything seemed normal. The cartridges had crimped tips, the typical sign of blanks. What Clint couldn't see was that these weren't blanks at all. They were live rounds that Ray Hoskins had loaded for a shooting demonstration he'd done at his range the previous weekend. Cartridges that looked similar to blanks because of how they'd been hand-loaded, but which contained real bullets and real powder. The sun climbed higher. The crew finished setting up the cameras, 3 of them positioned at different angles to capture the action from multiple perspectives. Sturgis wanted options in editing, wanted to be able to cut between wide shots and close-ups to maximize the drama. At 11:45, they were finally ready to shoot. "All right, everyone." Sturgis called out through his megaphone. "This is picture. Quiet on set. Sound roll. Camera roll." The assistant director called out, "Scene 14, take 1, and clapped the slate. Action." Dean pushed through the saloon, swinging doors, and stepped onto the wooden porch. His eyes, narrowed against the bright sunlight, both real and fictional, scanned the dusty street until they found Clint standing 30 feet away, positioned in the center of the dirt road. "I heard you were looking for me," Dean said, his voice carrying that distinctive casual tone that made everything sound effortless. "Cole Brennan," Clint replied, his voice low and measured. "Been a long time since you wore a gun. Long enough to forget how." "I doubt that." Clint's hand hovered near his holstered weapon. "They say you were the fastest once. I aim to find out if that's still true." Dean descended the porch steps slowly, deliberately, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. He stopped about 25 feet from Clint, farther than they rehearsed, but the blocking still worked. The 2 men faced each other, and for a moment, there was only silence, only the sound of wind moving through the false front buildings. Then everything happened at once. Dean's hand flashed to his gun, the movement surprisingly quick for a man who spent most of his time these days behind a microphone. He drew, aimed, and pulled the trigger in one fluid motion. The gun fired, but it didn't make the sharp crack of a blank. It made the deeper, fuller boom of a real gunshot, a sound every Western actor knew, but rarely heard on controlled film set. And there was something else, something that made Clint's blood run cold even before his conscious mind could process what was happening. There was a bullet, a real bullet, traveling at over 900 feet per second, cutting through the air exactly where Clint's chest had been a fraction of a second earlier. But Clint wasn't there anymore. His reflexes, honed by years of physical training and an almost supernatural awareness of his body in space, had kicked in the instant he'd seen Dean's finger tighten on the trigger, even before the gun fired, even before there was any sound or visible threat. Something in Clint's nervous system had registered danger and commanded his body to move. He dropped and twisted left in the diving roll he'd choreographed, but faster, more desperate, pure survival instinct overriding the planned theatrical movement. He hit the ground hard, tasting dust, feeling the impact jar through his shoulder, and heard the bullet crack past exactly where his torso had been standing. The sound was wrong. Clint knew it immediately, even rolling in the dirt. That wasn't a blank. That was a live round. He came up from the roll faster than planned, his hand going his own gun, not because he intended to fire back, but because training took over, because a gunfighter, even pretend one, draws when shot at. But his finger stayed off the trigger. His eyes went to Dean, who was still standing in his shooting stance, the gun extended, a look of confusion beginning to cloud his features. "Cut!" Sturgis yelled. "Cut! Cut!" What the hell was that? Everything stopped. The cameras kept rolling because the operators hadn't processed what happened yet. But the scene had fallen apart. Clint was on one knee in the dust, breathing hard, his gun half drawn. Dean was lowering his weapon, looking at it like it had betrayed him. "That wasn't a blank," Clint said, his voice tight and controlled, but with an edge that made everyone within earshot pay attention. "That was a real bullet." "What?" Dean's face went pale under his makeup. "No. Henry loaded blanks, I saw. I felt it go past," Clint interrupted, standing slowly. "I heard it. That was live ammunition." Henry Kellerman ran onto the set, his face already showing the dawning horror of understanding. He grabbed the gun from Dean's hand and broke it open. The smell hit him first, the distinctive acrid scent of burned powder from a full load, not the weaker smell of a blank. He looked at the remaining 4 cartridges in the cylinder, and his hands started shaking. "Oh, God," Henry whispered. "Oh, my God, these are live rounds. This is a real gun. This isn't one of mine." The set erupted into chaos. People shouting, running. Sturgis demanding explanations. Dean backing away from everyone with his hands up like he was the one under threat. But Clint just stood there in the middle of the street, dust still settling around him, his mind replaying the last 10 seconds over and over. If he'd been a half second slower, if he'd rolled right instead of left, if he'd hesitated for even a moment, Dean Martin would have shot him in the chest with a .45 caliber bullet. He would have died on this film set, killed by a prop gun that wasn't prop at all. The production shut down immediately. Paramedics were called, even though no one was injured. Police arrived, took statements, began an investigation. Ray Hoskins was located and brought to the set, where he confirmed the horrifying truth. Those were his guns, his live ammunition, never meant to be used in a scene. Eddie Solis, the security guard, broke down crying when he realized his mistake might have gotten someone killed. Dean Martin sat in his trailer for 2 hours, refusing to come out or speak to anyone. When he finally emerged, he looked 20 years older. He found Clint standing alone near the now-deserted set, staring at the spot where he'd rolled. "Clint," Dean said quietly, "I don't know what to say. I checked. I never would have." "I know," Clint said, turning to face him. "It wasn't your fault, Dean. You did everything right. You trusted the props, like we all do, like we have to. I could have killed you." Dean's voice broke. "I pulled that trigger thinking it was a blank, and it was a real bullet, and I aimed right at you, and if you hadn't moved, but I did move." Clint's voice was calm, almost eerily so. "I'm fine. No one got hurt." This time, Dean said, "But next time, how can any of us trust these weapons again? How can I ever pick up a prop gun and not wonder if it's real? How can you ever stand in front of someone firing at you and not think about today?" Clint didn't answer because he didn't have an answer. Dean was right. Something had broken on this set. Something fundamental about trust and safety and the unspoken contract between actors and crew that said everyone was looking out for everyone else. By the next morning, Clint Eastwood had made his decision. He met with the producers in a conference room at their Tucson hotel. Sturges was there, looking haggard. The studio executives were there, looking worried about their investment. Dean had chosen not to attend, respecting that this was Clint's call to make. "I'm leaving production," Clint said simply, effective immediately. The room exploded into protests. The film was a third of the way complete. They'd lose millions if they shut down. They could replace the entire prop department, implement new safety protocols, bring in experts from every major studio to certify every weapon before every scene. Clint listened to it all without expression. Then he said, "I understand the financial implications. I understand the disruption this causes. But I was nearly killed yesterday because of a series of mistakes that never should have happened. And the thing is, those mistakes can happen again. Different mistakes, maybe, but mistakes all the same. There are too many variables, too many people handling dangerous equipment, too many opportunities for something to go wrong." "So, you'll never do another Western?" one executive asked, incredulous. "You'll walk away from the genre that made you?" "No," Clint said. "I'll do Westerns, but I'll do them under conditions I can control, with crew I trust, with safety protocols I help design. What I won't do is stand in front of a gun and hope someone else has done their job correctly, because yesterday proved that hope isn't enough. They tried to change his mind for another hour. They offer more money, better billing, script approval, everything they could think of. Clint refused it all. He wasn't angry, wasn't making demands or threats. He was simply done. The bullet that had missed him by inches had severed his connection to this project as cleanly as if it cut a rope. When the meeting ended, Clint went to Dean's trailer. Dean was packing, preparing to return to Los Angeles now that filming had been suspended indefinitely. "I heard you're out," Dean said without looking up from his suitcase. "Yeah, can't say I blame you." Dean finally met Clint's eyes. "If someone had shot at me, even accidentally, even with the best intentions, I don't know if I could stand there and let it happen again." "It's not about blame," Clint said, "and it's not about fear. It's about control. In this business, we give up control in 100 ways every day. We trust directors to make us look good, editors to choose the right takes, cinematographers to light us properly. But trusting someone else with your life, with whether you live or die, that's different. Yesterday taught me I can't do that. Not like this." Dean nodded slowly. "You're going to be a big star, Clint. Bigger than me. Bigger than most of us. Those Italian Westerns you did, there's something special. People are going to notice. And when you're that big, you'll have the power to control these things, to make sets as safe as they should be." "Maybe," Clint said. "Or maybe I'll just make sure I'm never standing in front of a gun I haven't personally checked and cleared myself. That's not a bad policy." Dean extended his hand. "No hard feelings? I know me pulling that trigger, even though I didn't know, even though it was an accident. I know that's what will be between us now." Clint shook his hand firmly. "No hard feelings. You're a professional, Dean. You did your job. The system failed us both. If anything, I'm grateful for your aim being exactly where it was supposed to be. Your shot was true. That's what made it possible for me to dodge it. If you'd been sloppy, if you'd waved the gun around, the bullet could have gone anywhere. But you shot exactly where you aimed, and I knew where that would be. So I could move. In a weird way, you being good at your job saved my life." They parted as friends. Two professionals who'd survived something that would have ended careers or lives for less lucky men. Guns of Rio Concho was officially canceled 3 days later. The studio couldn't find a replacement for Clint on short notice, and Dean Martin made it clear he wasn't interested in continuing either. The few scenes they completed were locked in a vault somewhere, a testament to the film that almost was and the tragedy that almost happened. But the incident changed Hollywood in ways both large and small. Within 6 months, every major studio had implemented new firearm safety protocols. Prop guns had to be checked and certified by at least 2 people before being handed to an actor. Live ammunition was banned from film sets entirely, even in locked storage. The prop department and armory had to be completely separate operations. Actors were given the right to inspect any weapon they would handle before shooting began, and many took advantage of that right. Clint Eastwood became one of the most vocal advocates for set safety, particularly regarding weapons. When he started directing his own films years later, his sets became known for having the strictest safety standards in the industry, and he never, ever stood in front of a gun without personally verifying it was safe, a habit that became so well known that other actors started adopting it too. Dean Martin never quite recovered from the psychological impact of that day. He completed other films, continued his TV show, performed in Vegas, but those who knew him well said something had changed. The effortless cool that had defined his persona was still there on the surface, but underneath there was a new wariness, a recognition that things could go wrong in an instant despite everyone's best intentions. The story of what happened on that Tucson set in March 1968 became one of Hollywood's cautionary tales, whispered among crew members and shared with young actors as a warning about the importance of safety protocols. But for years, the details remained murky. Some versions claimed Dean had deliberately swapped guns, trying to scare Clint as a prank gone wrong. Others suggested sabotage by a crew member with a grudge. Wild theories circulated about mob connections or studio insurance fraud. The truth, documented in the police report and insurance investigation, was much simpler and somehow more frightening. It was just a mistake. A series of small, understandable errors by tired, overworked people doing their best. A security guard putting a crate in the wrong place. A prop master reaching for a gun in dim light. An actor trusting the safety systems that had never failed before. Normal human fallibility intersecting with lethal machinery in the worst possible way. And the only thing that had prevented tragedy was one man's reflexes, honed by years of practice and training, operating faster than conscious thought. Clint Eastwood's dive that day became legendary among stunt coordinators and action directors. Film students studied it, breaking down the biomechanics of his movement. How did he react so fast? How did he know which way to move? Clint's answer, given years later in an interview, was characteristically laconic. I didn't know. My body moved before my brain caught up. You do enough westerns. You develop an instinct for when someone's about to shoot. I just listened to that instinct. If I thought about it, analyze it, try to figure out the right move, I'd be dead. Sometimes survival is about trusting your gut and moving fast. The parallels to his on-screen persona weren't lost on anyone. The laconic gunfighter who acted on instinct, who trusted his reflexes over deliberation, who survived because he was just a little bit faster than everyone else. Art imitating life, or life imitating art. The line blurred beyond recognition. By the mid-1970s, Clint Eastwood was indeed a major star, just as Dean had predicted. Dirty Harry, High Plains Drifter, the outlaw Josie Wales, a string of iconic roles that cemented his status as one of Hollywood's most bankable actors. And on every set, crew members noticed his meticulous attention to safety, particularly around weapons. He would personally check every gun, watch the loading of every blank, position cameras, and crew to minimize risk. Some directors found it difficult. This actor who questioned everything and insisted on redundant safety checks. But most came to appreciate that Clint's vigilance made everyone safer, and that his legendary status gave him the power to make demands that lesser actors couldn't enforce. The incident in Tucson had taught him that safety wasn't someone else's responsibility. It was everyone's responsibility, and most especially the responsibility of those with the power to demand it. Dean Martin passed away in 1995, still haunted by what might have happened that day in the Arizona desert. In his later years, he told the story occasionally, always emphasizing the same point. Trust is essential in filmmaking, but verification is even more important. Trust the professionals, but verify their work. Trust the systems, but check them yourself. Trust your instincts, but stay alert. I trusted everyone that day, Dean said in one of his final interviews. I trusted Henry with the gun. I trusted the studio with our safety. I trusted the systems that had worked 1,000 times before. And I was right to trust them. They were all doing their jobs to the best of their ability. But trust alone isn't enough when lives are at stake. Clint understood that better than any of us. That's why he's still here, still working, still making great films. because he learned the hard lesson I had to teach him, even though neither of us wanted that particular education. Today, the incident on the set of Guns of Rio Concho is studied in film school safety courses and industry training programs. It's used as an example of how systems can fail, how good intentions aren't enough, how safety requires constant vigilance and redundant protections. The gun that Dean Martin fired at Clint Eastwood sits in a museum somewhere, deactivated and harmless now. A reminder of the day Hollywood almost lost one of its greatest stars to a preventable accident. And somewhere, in the back of every actor's mind when they pick up a prop gun on set, there's a little voice asking the question Clint Eastwood has asked himself 10,000 times since that March day in 1968. Is this the real one? The answer, thanks to decades of improved safety protocols and the lessons learned from near misses like this one, is almost certainly no. But almost certainly isn't the same as definitely. And that tiny margin of uncertainty, that recognition that things can always go wrong no matter how careful everyone tries to be, that's what keeps people alert and alive. The gun was supposed to be fake. Dean Martin fired it believing it was harmless. Clint Eastwood dodged brilliantly because his instincts were faster than the bullet meant to kill him. And an entire industry learned that safety isn't an accident. It's a choice made every day by every person on set, with the understanding that one mistake, one moment of carelessness can end a life or destroy a career. That's the real story. Not a tale of villainy or deliberate malice, but something more universal and more frightening. A story about how fragile safety is, how easily trust can be betrayed by simple human error, and how survival sometimes comes down to nothing more than reflexes, luck, and being a half-second faster than death itself. March 15, 1968. The day the gun wasn't fake. The day Dean Martin almost killed Clint Eastwood. The day that brilliant dodge saved a life and changed an industry. That's a story worth remembering, not for its drama, but for its lesson. In a business built on illusion, some dangers are all too real.